Welcome to the July edition of BBRO BeetCast. I'm Francesca Broom, your host and Knowledge Exchange Manager for BBRO. It looks like most of the region has now had some rain and the crop is surging ahead. And with that in mind, we want to ensure that canopy stays nice and healthy. So we are this month discussing foliar diseases and fungicide programs. And for once, we have some good news for you. Let's catch up with Mark, Simon, and a special guest.
So this month we're going to be talking about managing foliar diseases and our fungicide programs. And I'm very pleased to be joined by three guests this month. And we've got Professor Mark Stevens, Dr. Simon Bowen, and a very special guest. We have Ian Ford, who's a Business Development Manager for BASF. So welcome along, everybody. Obviously, July started the hot summer sun. We've seen quite a bit in June already, and certainly for most of the eastern region, we've just had a little bit of rain. So let me pick up with you first, Mark. Does the weather make a difference as to what foliar diseases we are likely to be seeing in the crop this year?
Many thanks, Ches, and hello everyone for listening on the latest podcast. Clearly, with regard to weather, it has a massive impact when it comes to foliar diseases. And it's not just this particular moment that's critical. We know for the crop this year, because of the rain that we had in March and April, some crops are later. And so it's sort of about growth stage 39 that's quite important for decision making when it comes to fungicides. So we just need to make sure that crops are at the right growth stage, although clearly given some of the heat we've had, and some have had some quite large amounts of rainfall in recent weeks, although some have missed it, that will have a consequence on crop development. But also then, like the question you've asked, Ches, the diseases that we're trying to tackle. So let's start with our more traditional disease that probably springs to mind first, and that's powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is a disease that likes it warm or even hot and dry, and survives on leaf trash and any sort of root remnants and groundkeepers from the season before. And if it continues dry and warm through July into early August, then powdery mildew will probably start to show in crops, and it will be also important to check varieties that are more susceptible to powdery mildew than others as your sort of key lead. But we anticipate the potential around about the middle of July, probably in the berry factory area first, then moving northwards. Remember, it's that one that produces that sort of white mould on the surface of the leaf.
So when you talk about being in berry area, why do you pick out berry? Is that because it's been rather a prominent disease there in the past?
It historically is seen in that area. It's often like slightly warmer. It then encourages development, particularly around the coastal area. I often see it in Essex first, and then into the wider Berry area before you go into Cantley, Wissington, and often it's last to see in the Newark area. It's a bit like aphids over time as well. You tend to see a sort of a migration or a movement from south to north, although clearly with the warmth we've been experiencing, that may not be as clear cut as it has been. But I would encourage anybody to start checking crops from the middle of July, and that will be the number one disease. The other traditional disease that we are probably going to have to keep an eye on is rust. But rust, if you take last year into consideration, although it came in relatively late, because rust does not like dry conditions. It likes that moisture and slightly cooler conditions. So higher temperatures suppress rust activity. And so it's probably going to be September, October before we see that, although never say never. But the disease that we really do need to keep a close eye on is the disease that we've been flagging within BBRO over recent years, and that's Cercospora, the disease that causes major problems elsewhere in Northwest Europe with the climate favouring it, and also in North America. But as we get warmer, wetter summers, then Cercospora, as we certainly saw in 2020 on the back of the virus yellows epidemic, and then the conditions favoured it, is one we need to watch.
as we've had quite an issue with Cercospora in 2020, does that mean there's a lot more spores around? Could that actually increase Cercospora in the forthcoming years?
Cercospora can survive down to about -30, -40. So once it's established, then it's there. It survives on beet trash, again, root remnants. The reason why BBRO continually put messaging out about crop hygiene, it's not just aphids, it's not virus yellows, it's not downy mildew, it's also powdery mildew, rust, and Cercospora. Really, really, really important. I cannot stress enough about the significance of crop hygiene going forward. And Cercospora is just another disease that if you provide the green bridge, you've got a headache. And as we get these conditions, cold weather will not take it out. And it will survive. And if the conditions enable it to start to germinate or the spores start to migrate, the pressure will start to develop on the crop. So, yeah, as we go through July, we do really need to closely keep an eye on the weather forecasts and the maps that the BBRO will issue through the bulletins.
And we have actually seen quite a lot of it in America, haven't we? I know Alistair went over and has actually been looking at quite a lot of the programs that they've been using, and it completely devastates the whole canopy, doesn't it? So it's
very much so.
Yeah, so it's not just the fact that we have Cercospora, it's reducing all the canopy cover for potential frosts and the winter. So we really do need to get on top of it, don't we?
And we've seen that in the UK. The trials that we had in the ground that weren't treated with fungicides, we lost canopy and we had yield reductions of up to 40% on the back of it.
And how important is it for growers to understand the diseases they have in their crop before they start a fungicide program?
I would always say you need to appreciate the challenges you've got there. So it is important to appreciate whether it's powdery mildew, rust, ramularia, Cercospora, or anything else. And that is important because you need to target the disease. The thing about the fungicide programs that we have in 2023, most of those programs are based around triazole and strobilurin mixes and actually have broad spectrum activity, which in some ways is good news because you're not having to target individual diseases. So it's a matter of appreciating what you've got and then making sure as soon as you start to see disease development, regardless of the specific disease, and treat accordingly, but following the label recommendations, which is critical in this process.
So what have we actually got available for growers in this season?
When it comes to 2023, I would encourage you all to get out your BBRO guide that was issued earlier in the year. So the crop protection options for 2023. Although, as we know, as we go through seasons, things can change, and we'll hear a little bit more about that in a moment. But the programs that are available, clearly we've got products like Angle and Priory Gold, which have azoxystrobin and difenoconazole, which will give you good broad spectrum activity against the classic diseases I've just described, and you have 2 applications of that. Remember, there's also Caligula that became available last year, which has the triazole, but also it was the first SDHI for foliar disease in fluropyram. But you can only apply that once, and there is the 1st of September restriction on that, so you cannot apply it before that time period. We still have Impact, which is flutriafol as a triazole active ingredient, but it is only on the label for moderate Cercospora and ramularia control. It's not there for powdery mildew or rust. And then there are various sulfur products that are available, which will be more targeting powdery mildew, but they're all on the list. But clearly, we work very closely with all the companies, within BBRO trials, are looking at existing products for disease control, but we also look at new products that are coming to market. And it's quite exciting that we do have a new product coming to market, and that will give growers further options for disease control that they probably hadn't appreciated until this point in the season.
And Mark, we have done some of the trials for that product, haven't we? So do you want to just tell us a little bit about what we've seen?
Yeah, so we've been looking at all sorts of different products in the pipeline. including the new one that you're about to hear. And it does give excellent disease control. And also on the back of that, maintaining the canopy right through the autumn and into winter to maximise photosynthetic capacity and sugar concentration and early frost protection. But I'll hand over to Ian Ford now, and I'll let him bring you right up to speed with regard to this new product.
Right, so Ian, new kid on the block.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to join you today, because I'm pleased to let everybody know that we now have approval for Rebistar XE in sugar beet, which we're really excited and pleased to have, because as Mark has said, through the trials work that we've done with BBRO, we've been really pleased to see how it provides really strong disease control across all the diseases, plus that strong greening effect, which has led to increased yield. It's certainly a really strong addition to the fungicide portfolio and armoury that growers will have this season.
And obviously this is going to be new to sugar beet, but it's actually not a new product to the agricultural industry, is it?
That's right. It's been available for a number of seasons now in cereals, and it's proven to be a really reliable and powerful product for disease control in wheat and barley. But having said that, we're also really pleased to see that during the trials work, we've noticed that both of the active ingredients in Rebisol, both the Xemium and the Rebisol, provide really strong disease control themselves. So Rebistar actually is a really well-balanced co-formulation that suits sugar beet just as much as it does cereals.
And if we've got growers that have already got the Rebistar in their armoury, can they just continue to use the product even though it's not on the current label?
Yes, they can. And the product is now fully approved for use in sugar beet and will be available this season for use. But as you suggest, some product that's already in the supply chain may well still be carrying the old label. And whilst it won't actually say sugar beet on that label, growers are still entirely legally able to use it, provided they just download the relevant approval from CRD's website. As new product comes in, obviously the new label will carry the sugar beet approval as well.
And there's plenty of product out there for growers to access, I assume.
There is, yes, there is sufficient quantity for this year, but it's worth considering the products and disease pressures that we have out there as to what products are chosen.
It's going to be great news for sugar beet growers because we've done a lot of work of Cercospora, and it has been one of those things that have flagged concern for us for the last couple of years and led really to us doing the Cercospora risk forecasting, which you've been leading, haven't you, Simon?
That's right, yes. So we usually start looking at data quite early in the season. We usually take it from the beginning of June, just so we can keep a very early eye on things. As Mark says, we really don't see problems coming until later in the season, but you never know with our weather sometimes, Jez, do you? And certainly in the middle of June, we've had some very hot weathers followed by thunderstorms. And just to reiterate what Mark said, Cercospora is probably the most aggressive of our foliar diseases, and it is very much dependent on temperature and moisture. And if you remember, we use a model based out of America. We've used it for 2-3 seasons now, but we also use a series of in-field networks as well, and I'll perhaps pick up on those in a moment. But we work with WeatherQuest, which have that model, and effectively looks at temperature and humidity. And humidity is one of the key factors, and obviously we look at the number of hours in a day when that humidity is above 90%. And certainly when you're sitting at 20 degrees and you start those humidity hours begin to pick up, certainly to between 10 and 15, that's when we get into the higher risk, and we calculate what we call a daily infection value, a 2-day value, DIV. And when it becomes more than 6, we know those conditions are conducive for Cercospora to develop. And I'm going to stress that point. It's a risk system identifying the situations which are conducive for Cercospora development. It's not a system which tells you to spray.
And it's over 2 days because a small period of humidity doesn't really have any effect, does it?
Absolutely, it's that humidity which is really important, and we monitor that. And and as crops certainly by July, we'll have all pulled together and got full canopies meeting across the rows. They begin to create that microclimate within the canopy, which is why we like to have some sensors in the crop. And as well as measuring humidity, we also have a leaf wetness indicator. So it's basically an artificial leaf, which can measure condensation events, rain, or even sometimes on a foggy day, we'll measure that. And obviously it's important because there is new research work saying actually leaf wetness is very closely related to development of disease as well. So it's really kind of belts and braces that we're monitoring through a whole range of networked sites, but also have a series of our in-crop canopies across the BBRO network as well. And we monitor those every day.
And this is going across the whole of the beet growing area, isn't it?
We've seen certain areas seem to be kind of more prone to scoring high risks. We can actually focus messaging in those two areas because it's really important we perhaps target fungicides rather than blanket spraying everything. And it is all about identifying risk.
And I think the squares, it actually works out within like a 5-mile radius, isn't it? So we can be quite accurate as to what's happening in the field.
That's right. And, we're learning it because this is our third season, isn't it, Jez? And we begin to see certain coastal areas. And I just think it's part of topography, but sometimes onshore, offshore breezes where you get the kind of sea fog or har, as I used to call it in Scotland, coming in. That can trigger it, of course. So it's something we learn. And there's certain other areas, certainly probably sometimes low-lying areas, obviously where it can get very hot down on the black fen soil. So we can identify these areas. And it's all about identifying the risk. And remember, our message to you is the risk is high in your area. When it is, go and check your crops for the very, very first signs of Cercospora.
And once we finish the aphid survey, this risk forecasting will actually sort of take the place of that, certainly in front of our website. And so there'll be a daily update as to what we're seeing. If there's a risk, we'll obviously highlight it to everybody. We'll have the maps in the advisory bulletin, and where we see major risk, we'll also do a text message direct to the growers in those areas, won't we?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Just to pick up on your point, Simon, about growers checking crops as soon as they can, because in relation to both Rebistar XE and all the other fungicides that are on the market, they're all protectant in activity. So they need to be applied at the very first signs of disease to get the best results from them.
Is it 2-spray programme with the Revistar?
Yes, that's right, Ches. Revistar XE can be used twice in the crop, up to a 28-day interval before harvest.
And I know, Mark, you're always on about making sure you're tight on the intervals for any sprays. Again, would you recommend people to continue to check the crop?
Oh, it's very important, Ches, to keep an eye on the crop as you go through the season. As Ian's just touched on, at the first sign of disease, then it's important to get sprays on for that protectant activity to minimise the disease control. But what we've found, and Simon and I have seen in recent years, is that given the conditions that sometimes we're faced with, if you are going with a program approach and may need to apply 2 or 3 fungicides, depending on the disease risk and also your harvest potential plans, then you need to make sure that the second and or third spray that goes on is somewhere between 21 and 28 days. Because if you extend that period, there's great risk then you allow disease in without any protection, and you can get some late infection, which can really start to take off. And again, if you start then spraying late, once that disease has managed to establish itself, you're going to be really fighting a losing cause. And we see that in BBRO trials historically, where we play with timings and sometimes we miss the second spray and go to the T3 timing. So there's up to 40 days between sprays, if not slightly longer. And that really can cause some big issues. And then people then start to ask and challenge the value of the spray program. But what we found is if you keep it tight, it will work.
I think the other factor I'd like to make, again, when we're assessing risk, because it is all about risk assessment, is think about your varieties, of course. So obviously you'll all have copies of the RL list, and on there you'll have ratings for the 3 diseases, rust, powdery mildew and Cercospora. The scores are on a 1 to 9 scale. So 1 means very high leaf infection, 9 very low leaf infection. And if you just scan across on those different diseases, you'll find quite a variation, particularly particularly in rust. I think the average is 5.7, but it ranges from 2.8 to 8.1. So clearly there are some varieties there you might need to watch a little bit more carefully. Similarly with powdery mildew, the average is 5, which is bang in the middle. But again, varieties range from 2.4 to 5.7. And Cercospora actually is probably less variable at the moment. They're all quite a little bit susceptible. The average is 6.5 and it ranges from 5.5 to 8.5. But there is a variety factor in which really needs to be put into the equation when you're thinking about spray intervals. And again, I will just reiterate the late harvesting one again, because if you are going late harvesting, probably a third spray might be required. Again, don't assume it. Let's not be formulaic about it. Let's assess it according to risk.
And we don't want to raise too much in the way of concern, but certainly in America, where they've not got on top of the Cercospora early, they're using sort of 5-6 spray programs, aren't they?
Yeah, that's not unusual. And they may have some different and very aggressive strains we don't know, but that is something we're looking at. And again, probably just worth throwing into the equation, because you may have seen us at some of our open days. We're trying to be a little bit smarter about our assessment of risk by actually introducing another level of monitoring, and that's measuring spore numbers in the air around crops. It's going to take a little bit of time to get that data and unpick the relationships, but they also already do that in America. And that could be really useful again in actually identifying risk at even a higher degree of accuracy, if you like, for us. Or we might just find spores everywhere. We don't know, but it's an approach I think we're very keen to do, and there's a lot of work going on in BBRO to look at that.
We're obviously trying our best to keep on top of the situation, and we'll keep growers informed. But you mentioned just a little while ago about the RL and the traits that are there. It's worth just highlighting that, because I would imagine the seed orders will be out some point over the summer. So what would you say to growers that are about to put in their order for 2024?
Well, depending on when the seed order comes out, if you have the opportunity, come to our beet field events in July, where we will be on sites where we have the varieties all planted out. They do get protected with fungicides on those. They're not untreated trials, but we will be able to discuss the different varieties and have all the boards up showing their ratings for the different diseases. And I think, if you have got crops which are going to have a range of harvest dates, you may want to factor in a variety disease rating, particularly if you're later harvest crops as well, but also give you some insight to where you are with your kind of total sugar beet crop and risk to foliar diseases, particularly if you start choosing a lot of varieties which are more susceptible. Think about your variety choice in terms of your seed order is really important.
And in the same way that we're planning ahead to manage the risks for people, we need growers to take responsibility and plan ahead for themselves as well, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely, Jess.
Right, so on that thought then, Simon, on talk of seed orders and 2024, we'll just say thank you very much for your time, gents, and I hope to catch up with you later on in the year.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.
Many thanks, Jess.
As mentioned by Ian, Revistar for sugar beet is now available for use and will be officially launched in mid-July, when the information will be available on the BBRO website as part of our updated Weed, Pests and Diseases booklet. We hope some of you will be able to join us at our demo farms, which are running in July the 18th and the 20th. Again, details on our website and hopefully through your email box very shortly. And for those of you wanting basis points, I'm afraid we haven't received them yet for the July edition, but it means you'll have a double whammy in August. I hope cereal harvest goes well, and I will speak to you soon. Thank you for listening.